The Boy Who Reversed Himself by William Sleator, Chapter 9. And you didn't even notice? Omar said. Gee, Laura, you're really making progress. He didn't sound thrilled about it. We were on our way to school. Nothing looked peculiar to me at all, even though the sun was rising out of the west. Why is it progress to forget the difference between left and right? I asked him. Because it's a trivial difference. Left and right kata here or ana there doesn't matter much in four space. Sometimes you're looking at our world from kata, sometimes from ana. After you get used to looking at it both ways, you stop noticing the difference. Take a look at one of your books. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked through my biology book. It looks normal, I said, but it can't be. Omar, it should be mirror writing like the other times I was reversed. It is mirror writing in relation to you. You can read both ways now. Congratulations, you've passed a big hurdle. He looked sick as he said it. Thanks? I said distractedly. I wasn't sure I liked what had happened, or what other implications it had. I wasn't thinking very clearly as we hurried into biology. Before Mr. Dixon brought the class to order, he called Omar up to his desk, spoke quietly to him, and gave him a note. Omar read it frowning, then he hurried out of the room. Omar didn't come back during biology. After class, I made a point of leaving the room at the same time as Pete, so that we could walk to English together. Since our last phone conversation, when I had promised him that soon we would have some amazing times together, he had spoken to me a couple of times at school. His manner had been a little stiffer than it had been before the cafeteria incident, as though he was still nursing his wounded vanity, but at least he wasn't ignoring me. Today, with Omar anyway, I tried to be as charming as possible, smiling a lot and cracking jokes. Pete smiled a little, but he also kept watching my face in a speculative way, as though he wasn't sure he could trust me. It was frustrating, because I couldn't explain to him the real reason why I had been hanging around with Omar without giving Omar's secret away. I was going to have to find some other way to convince Pete that I really was interested in him. In English, Mrs. Bowers called on Pete to diagram a sentence on the board. He did it badly, and she spoke sharply to him. When he went back to his seat, his face was flushed and petulant, just as it had been that day in the cafeteria. Then she called me to diagram the same sentence. I knew Pete would resent me if I did it right and showed him up in front of the class, so I did it wrong on purpose, forgetting I was reversed. Naturally, no one noticed the mistake I made because the sentence came out in mirror writing. The class, especially Pete, thought it was hilarious. Mrs. Bowers did not. I hurried out of class to find Omar. I had to get him to reverse me back before anything else went wrong. I was also getting terribly hungry. I hadn't had supper the night before, and I was apprehensive about what reversed food, especially reversed school cafeteria food, was going to taste like. But Omar wasn't in his locker, and he wasn't in our next class. Then I remembered that Mr. Dixon had given him a note. I dashed in to ask Mr. Dixon about it before lunch. Omar, it seemed, had been called home because of some kind of emergency. I felt like groaning. Just my luck to end up reversed at school with Omar not there to flip me over. Who knew what kind of embarrassing thing would happen next? Still, it gave me the chance to spend some time with Pete, and luckily there was an empty space at his table at lunch. Okay if I sit here, I said. He shrugged. Why not? Then he smiled more warmly than he had back in the corridor, almost as though he couldn't help it. Hey, that was a pretty funny trick you pulled in English, he said. That hag Bowers didn't know what to make of it. Oh, yeah, I said, thinking fast. I wanted to take advantage of what had happened to help win Pete over again. I just thought diagramming sentences is such a stupid waste of time, and she's so serious about it. Why not shake her up a little, lighten things up? That class sure needed it. Pete studied my face pleasantly. You look different today, Laura, softer around the eyes. You changed your makeup or something? Yeah, I said, realizing that the way he saw me now was the way I usually saw myself in the mirror. I'm starving, I said to change the subject. Good thing they're having hamburgers today. Not much they can do to ruin a burger. I wouldn't be too sure about that, said Arlene. I tried to be as inconspicuous as possible about carefully smelling everything before tasting. The hamburger bun smelled like nail polish remover, so I pushed that aside. The meat itself didn't have much smell, so I took a cautious nibble, a mistake. It tasted exactly like the odor of dirty gym socks. I guess you were right, Arlene, I said lightly. This place can make even a burger taste like dirty laundry. Dirty laundry. I thought I recognized the smell, Pete said, chuckling. I bet the cafeteria cooks raid the lost and found to find things from the locker room to stretch out the hamburger, I said, inspired by his approval. It's probably one of the trade secrets they learn when they go to cafeteria cook school. I was wondering what happened to those old sweatpants I lost. Cafeteria cook school, I love it, Pete said. I was still ravenous and made a stab at the coleslaw, another mistake. It not only smelled like fancy perfume, but it also tasted like fancy perfume, filling my mouth with a stinging soapy flavor. I had to kill the taste, and without thinking, I dipped a French fry in ketchup and bit into it. The French fry turned out to be like a combination of anchovies and licorice, phenomenally repulsive in the same mouthful. But the ketchup, it was the most exquisitely delectable substance I had ever tasted. It was irresistible, as dark and luscious as the most expensive chocolate, as creamy and buttery as the richest frozen custard, with an unexpected tangy splash of freshly pickled wild strawberries. In seconds, I had slurped up the contents of the little plastic ketchup packet. You want your ketchup? I said, reaching hungrily for the unopened packet on Arlene's tray. Not as much as you do, apparently, she said. I ripped it open and squeezed it into my mouth. I'll get you some more. Back in a sec, I said, jumping up and racing for the condiment table. I stuffed a half-dozen packets into my pockets and returned with 2 big handfuls of them. I dropped one on Arlene's plate and tore open another. Pete emptied a packet on his plate, stuck his finger in it, and licked it. Just tastes like plain old ketchup to me, he said matter-of-factly, but still amused. Oh, if only you could understand. If only you could really understand. A tremendous idea occurred to me. All I had to do was go out into force space with some ketchup, reverse myself, and bring it back. Then it would be reversed ketchup. It would taste as incredibly delicious to everybody else as it did to me. I'll prove it to you, I said, grinning at Pete, feeling strangely lightheaded all of a sudden. Just you wait. I'll give you some ketchup that will change your life. Pete threw back his head and laughed. Hey, Laura, he said, how come you always used to seem so serious? I never knew you could be such a laugh riot. I told you you'd see my crazy side one of these days. I reached over and squeezed his chin between 2 fingers. But you ain't seen nothing yet. I have talents you wouldn't believe. Yeah? Pete said, his eyes fixed on me. Then abruptly he stood up and looked at his watch. You finished? Come on, we've still got a little time before next period. I want to show you something. Okay, I got up, lurching only slightly. As we started across the cafeteria, the entire room looked like a living stained glass window, flooded with brilliant light and color, populated by angels. I sailed through them, smiling and waving blissfully at everyone I knew and a lot of people I didn't know. The most beautiful angel of all was right beside me, impressed by my cleverness and wit, and the glorious taste of reversed ketchup still tingled on my tongue. The stuff didn't merely taste marvelous, it made you feel so marvelous in a totally unexpected way. By the way, where are we going? I asked Pete outside the cafeteria. To my secret place. He grinned at me and took my hand. We hurried up 2 flights of stairs to the top floor of the building, then through a doorway and up a short flight of metal stairs I had never noticed before. Pete, where are you taking me? You'll see. There was only a narrow space at the top and a metal door. Pete turned the knob and leaned against the door to push it open, and stepped out into bright sunlight. The roof, he announced. Come on. I followed him, wrapping my arms around myself. It was cold out, and we didn't have our coats. I bet we're not supposed to be here, I said. Who's going to notice us? Nobody comes up here. I've been sneaking out here all year. He bent over and placed a pebble against the door frame, then carefully positioned the door against the pebble to keep it open. The door was heavy and seemed to be the type that slammed shut on its own. He stood up and guided me out onto the roof, his hand on my shoulder. Look around. Isn't it great up here? The roof was flat, and since the school was at the top of the hill, you could see for miles. Kind of cold, but yeah, it's beautiful, I said and giggled, still feeling the ketchup. See that cloud? Looks just like a face. See the nose? Uh-huh, Pete said, not looking. He led me around to the other side of the little structure that enclosed a stairway, then pushed me gently against the wall and did not take his hands away. You like to dance? He asked me, his breath sending little puffs of steam against my face. I love it. I'm a fantastic dancer, I lied happily. Well, he paused, his face close to mine. Would you like to go to the spring dance with me? Yes, I said instantly. Good, then it's a date. He put both arms around me and began kissing me. Part of me knew it wasn't the time or the place, but under the influence of the ketchup I had no resistance. Anyway, this was Pete, the best-looking, most popular boy in our class. A minute or so later, we noticed the bell ringing distantly below us. Pete stepped away and looked at his watch. "Gee, I forgot about the time," he said, looking half awake. Got to get to gym. Come on." The metal door was closed. "Huh?" Pete said. "But I put that pebble..." He pulled the handle. The door didn't move. "Oh, no," he whispered. "This doesn't..." He tried the door, then groaned again and turned toward me. "It's locked. The pebble must have slipped out." I was too lightheaded to feel much concern. "Well, at least there's a good view, and we have plenty of ketchup to eat." "It's not funny, Laura." Pete shook the door again, then banged it. "Hey, let us in. We're locked out," he shouted. We waited, listened. There was no response. "Wouldn't it be a drag if we were stuck up here all night?" I said and giggled again. "We'd probably freeze to death. My fingers are already numb." "Don't say that, Laura. I've got to get to gym next period." "Hey, I have a French test next period myself," I said. "Think she'd flunk me if I didn't show up?" "But I can't miss gym." Pete kicked the door. "Hey, we're locked out up here," he shouted. "Too bad Omar isn't here," I murmured. "He could just pull us." Then something occurred to me. In my present state of mind, it seemed to make sense. I was technically accomplished now. I didn't know left from right. I could read backwards and forwards. Maybe I didn't need Omar to pull me out there anymore. Maybe I could do it on my own. "Omar, what's that jerk got to do with this?" Nothing. Forget Omar," I mumbled, thinking hard. After all, I had made the trip with Omar over and over again, moving Anna and Kata had become so natural to me that it had changed my brain. I knew what it felt like to move Anna and Kata. I knew where those directions lay, so why couldn't I just take a little step in one of those directions by myself? And what could I lose by trying? If it hadn't been for the ketchup, I might have seen the trouble this would get me into, but I wasn't thinking about that. I stood still and closed my eyes. I concentrated hard. I thought about exactly what it felt like to move Anna and Kata. I pointed myself in the Anna direction. I took a step, but it was different from moving that way when I was already out there. It required a lot more sheer physical effort. It was like swimming straight down underwater, fighting the natural buoyancy that wants to pull you to the surface. Like playing a tough game of tug-of-war or arm wrestling a strong opponent. I struggled, getting out of breath. I could feel the Anna direction. I knew exactly where it was. I just had to push hard enough to get there. "What's the matter with you, Laura? You look sick. Don't get hysterical now," Pete said hysterically. I fought harder, grunting, pushing Anna with all my strength. The pebbled roof dropped away. Pete shouted. I keeled over. The world bent and twisted and tilted off to the side. Then I was crouching on the wall, looking sideways down the stairs. "Laura!" I heard Pete wail. "This can't! I don't..." "Hey, pretty good," I gasped. I had done it. I could hardly believe it. I wanted to jump up and down and shout, "Force space belonged to me now." "No! Oh, no!" Pete was whispering Kata and behind me. The second bell rang. I did my best to think rationally. Then I carefully turned around, reversing the ketchup in my pockets and unreversing myself. I stepped over the wall, pulled myself down Kata, and was standing inside the door. I pushed it open. "Come on, Pete," I said, feeling smug. "Huh?" Pete stood there staring at me, his mouth open. "Come on, you'll be late for gym." I pulled him inside and the door slammed behind him. "Laura, am I going crazy? It looked like you disappeared, and now you're in here." "Oh," I said, suddenly realizing I was going to have to come up with an explanation. How could I do it without betraying Omar? I've got to go now." I turned and ran down the steps. I did badly on the French test, still feeling fuzzy-headed and wondering what I was going to tell Pete. I tried to get away quickly after school, but he was waiting for me at my locker. "Laura, how'd you do that?" he demanded, keeping step with me as I hurried across the schoolyard. Now I knew how Omar had felt. Pete was just as pushy as I had been, and just as unwilling to accept the line about being good with locks. He had actually seen me ripple off into force space, after all. If I hadn't been high on reversed ketchup, I would never have done it. Now I was trapped. I held him off all the way to my house. But by then he was getting angry. "Laura, I know what I saw," he said outside my door. "I'm not leaving until you tell me how you did it." "Maybe you better come inside," I said, thinking of Omar next door. He would be devastated when he found out I had betrayed him. Was it possible that he had been watching from force space and knew about it already? No, I quickly assured myself. If he'd been watching us on the roof, He would have opened the door himself instead of letting me go into force space in front of Pete. Anyway, he had been called away from school. Maybe I was lucky and he was downtown somewhere, helping Mr. Campanelli fight the Highway Commission. He probably didn't know what I had done. Could I keep him from finding out? Do you still want to go to the dance with me, Laura? Pete asked in the front hall. The dance? Oh, yeah, the dance. Sure I do. Then tell me what happened on the roof. Now I swear I'll never talk to you again if you don't. I'm waiting. But I still hesitated. I seemed to care about Omar a lot more than I had realized. The thought of hurting him was agonizing. On the other hand, I couldn't bear to lose Pete. And maybe I didn't have to. After all, if Omar were watching now, he'd certainly let me know and warn me to keep my mouth shut. That meant Omar had to be occupied somewhere else. If I told Pete now, Omar might never know. Then I wouldn't have to give anything up. And even if Omar did find out, there wasn't anything he could do to get back at me. We were equal now. Force space belonged to me too. Why shouldn't I share it with Pete? Because it's too dangerous, Omar would have said. Because anybody who gets caught in force space has to be killed. I tried to dismiss that worry. It was so extreme, and Omar had never given me any evidence at all that it was true. Still, I did feel nervous up in my room when I started telling Pete about force space. He was a lot slower than I had been about picking up the concepts. He kept arguing about small points and saying things like, I wouldn't believe any of this stuff if I hadn't seen you disappear like that. I had to repeat the paper doll routine several times before he got the idea behind it. And as soon as he did, he began pressing me to take him out there immediately. I couldn't come up with any good excuse not to. I felt a little guilty about Omar, but I was also eager to show off for Pete. What other girl could offer him that kind of adventure? And what other girl could offer him reversed ketchup? How come the label's backwards, he said. You're not just stalling, are you? No, I'm not. It was a little disappointing, even irritating that it took Pete so long to understand things. The label's backwards because it's reversed, like I was telling you. I flipped it over in force space. Try it. He opened one of the packets and squeezed it into his mouth. Then he practically jumped out of his chair. What is this stuff? Where did you get it? It's incredible. Can I have another one? I told you what it was, Pete, I said, patiently getting up. I tossed him another packet and went over to the closet to get my rope and flashlight. Hey, you got any more of this? He said, dropping the empty packet, his voice husky. No, that's it, I lied. I didn't want him to get out of control, and I wasn't foolish enough to eat any myself. One of us was going to have her wits about her where we were going. Hey, Laura, anybody ever tell you what a great mouth you have? He said, lolling back in his chair and beaming up at me. He reached out and grabbed me around the waist. Not now! I pulled away from him, knelt down, and hurriedly tied one end of the rope around the leg of my desk. If you want me to take you into force space, you're going to have to do what I say, I told him. It's confusing out there, and I don't have a whole lot of experience. Leaving the main body of the rope neatly coiled, I stood up and threaded the other end several times through one of my belt loops. It can even be dangerous, I went on, so you have to follow my instructions. Could you stand up, please? Yes, ma'am, he said, standing up and smiling at me. I couldn't help smiling back. He looked so appealing, with his curly blonde hair and dimpled chin. He had taken off his sweater and was wearing a t-shirt that clung to the muscles on his upper arms and chest. What's with the rope? He said. So we can find our way back. I tied the end of the rope securely around one of his belt loops, leaving a couple of feet between us. I grasped the thick coil in my left hand. It was a 50-foot length of clothesline, meaning there was at least 40 feet between us and the desk. We certainly wouldn't want to go any farther away than a couple of steps from my room. Tying the rope made me think of Omar again and the first time he had taken me into force space. I felt a terrible pang. I knew this was going to wound him badly, and maybe it really was more dangerous than I realized. He might have had a good reason not to tell me any more than he had, but at least I hadn't said anything to Pete about Omar. He didn't know that Omar had anything to do with it at all. Come on, Laura. You're not going to break out now, are you? Pete coaxed me, looking down at me with what seemed like real warmth in his wonderful blue eyes. I took his hand. It was so much nicer than Omar's cool, strong and dry. Don't let go of my hand no matter what, I said. Here we go. But moving Anna was even harder with Pete in tow than it had been on my own. I felt for the direction. I leaned into it, but this time I was fighting against the thick web of invisible rubber cords that held us back. I pushed harder than I had before, gasping. The cords quivered against me, humming in their intensity to keep us back. I struggled against them, and I felt them begin to weaken. I knew I could break through. I gritted my teeth, grunted, and wrenched myself on with every muscle in my body. The cords broke. Pete cried out as we burst through. Then we were tumbling over and over in the Anna direction. Because of Pete's extra weight, I had been pushing too hard when the cords suddenly let go. Now I flailed wildly to slow our momentum as we rolled over and over each other down what felt like a steep slope. When we stopped rolling, I opened my eyes. I saw that we had gone a lot farther than 1 or 2 little steps from my room. And that is the end of Chapter 9.